The ship Final Hope dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the galactic core, and Lee Daeho saw hell itself spread before them. The Nexus core wasn't just a structure, it was a wound in reality. Stars had been torn from their orbits and arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Planets hung in impossible formations, connected by streams of pure thought made visible. At the center of it all was the core itself, a sphere larger than most solar systems, pulsing with the stolen dreams of 1 trillion enslaved minds. Around it the Eternal Five waited, beings so powerful that space-time bent around them like water around stones. "My God," whispered Captain Song, staring at the displays. "How do we fight something like that?" Dr. Park, now more energy than matter, flickered between dimensions as she studied their target. "We don't fight them in normal space. In there, the laws of physics are whatever they want them to be. We have to reach the conceptual realm, the place where ideas have form." Their small fleet included volunteers from every freed species. Vorthak crystal ships that could reshape themselves at will, Nimael vessels that existed as pure energy, Kalahari craft that moved through probability itself, and dozens of others. But even together they were like insects approaching giants. The battle began before they even reached the outer defenses. Threshkanan, oldest of the five, simply looked at their fleet, and 3 ships ceased to exist. Not destroyed, but edited out of reality as if they had never been built. All ships, evasive patterns, Lee commanded, but he knew conventional tactics were useless here. "Park, can you get us to that conceptual realm you mentioned?" "I can try," she replied, her form becoming more translucent. "But once we're there, we'll be fighting in a place where will and belief are weapons. Stay focused on what you know to be true, no matter what you see." Reality twisted around them as Park opened a passage into conceptual space. Suddenly, they weren't flying through normal space anymore. They were moving through a realm of living ideas. The ship became a symbol of hope and determination, while their enemies appeared as vast shadows of despair and control. Here, the Eternal Five revealed their true nature. They weren't beings anymore, they were concepts made flesh. Threshkanan was order itself, a crystalline structure of absolute logic. Felmoth was stagnation, a gray void that consumed change. Gorthak was consumption, an endless hunger that devoured potential itself. "You see us as we truly are." Threshkanan's voice echoed through dimensions. "We are what your galaxy requires: perfect order, eternal stability, blessed stillness. Your chaos brings only suffering." The conceptual battle was unlike anything Lee could have imagined. Ships fired ideas instead of weapons. Beams of creativity crashed against shields of rigid thinking. The coalition forces fought with concepts of freedom and growth, while the hegemony wielded laws of physics like clubs. But something was wrong with the Eternal Five. As the battle raged, Park began to understand what she was seeing. "They're not complete," she told Lee through their mental link. "They consumed their own species, but that made them hollow. They have all the power, but none of the wisdom that created it." It was true. The Five had gained incredible abilities by devouring their civilizations, but they had lost something essential: the diversity of thought that makes wisdom possible. They were perfect representatives of their original natures, but they could no longer grow or adapt. "The core," Park said suddenly. "I can see it now. It's not just processing stolen potential, it's trying to fill the emptiness inside them. But it can never work. They're trying to use other beings' creativity to replace their own." As their small fleet fought its way toward the Nexus core, sacrificing ship after ship to get closer, something unexpected happened. Across the galaxy, every freed being was focusing their thoughts on the same goal: not victory in battle, but transformation. The psychic pressure of billions of minds thinking about freedom and change began to affect the conceptual realm itself. The rigid structures the Eternal Five had built started to crack. For the first time in 50,000 years, their perfect order was being challenged by something they couldn't control or consume. "Impossible," Threshkanan said, its voice showing the first hint of uncertainty. "We are eternal. We are perfect. We cannot be changed." "That's exactly why you can be," Park replied, her energy form now blazing like a star. "You stopped growing 50,000 years ago. We never did." The final approach to the core was a nightmare of warped reality. Lee watched his remaining crew members, beings from a dozen different species, work together with a coordination that no force in the galaxy had ever achieved. They moved not as separate individuals, but as parts of a greater whole, each contributing their unique abilities to a common goal. When they finally reached the core's surface, Park began the most dangerous part of their mission. She had to merge with the structure itself, becoming part of the network that had enslaved the galaxy for millennia. If this works, she told Lee before beginning the merge, the liberation virus will spread through every binding relay in the galaxy. Every enslaved mind will be freed instantly, but it will also transform the network itself into something new. And if it doesn't work? Park smiled, and for a moment she was just the young engineer he had met so long ago. Then at least we tried. She merged with the core, and immediately the conceptual realm exploded into chaos. The liberation virus wasn't just a program, it was a living idea of what the galaxy could become. Instead of central control, it offered voluntary cooperation. Instead of forced order, it provided chosen harmony. The effect on the Eternal Five was immediate and devastating. Beings who had existed as pure order for eons suddenly felt the touch of chaos, but instead of destroying them, it began to complete them. The emptiness they had carried for 50 millennia started to fill, not with stolen potential but with genuine possibility. What is happening to us? Velmoth whispered, its gray void beginning to sparkle with new colors. You're remembering what it feels like to grow. Park's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. You're remembering what you sacrificed when you chose control over change. Across the galaxy, the effect was instantaneous. Every binding relay transformed from a tool of control into a network of sharing. Species that had been mentally enslaved for generations suddenly had access not only to their own potential, but to the knowledge and abilities of every other being in the galaxy. But the transformation went deeper than anyone had expected. The network didn't just free existing minds, it began connecting them in ways that created something entirely new. Individual consciousness remained, but it was now part of a larger awareness that spanned species and star systems. The Eternal Five, faced with this new reality, had a choice. They could fight to maintain their old nature and fade into irrelevance, or they could embrace change and become part of something greater. One by one, they chose transformation. Threshkanan's rigid order softened into flexible structure. Velmoth's stagnation became patient wisdom. Gorthak's consumption transformed into nurturing growth. They remained powerful, but their power now served creation instead of control. Lee found himself back in normal space, floating in a ship near where the Nexus core had been. But the massive structure was gone, replaced by something beautiful, a network of living light that connected every star in the galaxy. Park? He called out, looking for his friend. I'm here, came her voice, though he couldn't see her. I'm everywhere now. We all are, in a way. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy, the magnitude of what had happened became clear. The liberation virus hadn't just freed enslaved minds. It had created the first truly free civilization in galactic history. Species that had been enemies were now working together on projects that none of them could have imagined alone. 50 years later, Lee stood on the observation deck of a space station that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, watching beings of pure energy dance with creatures of living crystal around stars that sang in harmony. The galaxy had become something unprecedented, a collective consciousness that preserved individual identity while enabling cooperation on a cosmic scale. Humanity, once the galaxy's most restricted species, had become its greatest gift, not because they were superior, but because they had shown everyone else what it meant to be truly free. New ships were being built that could travel to other galaxies, crewed by beings who existed across multiple dimensions. The question was no longer how to break chains, but what wonders they might discover when they met other free civilizations among the stars. The galaxy was no longer shackled. It was awake, it was free, and it was ready to explore infinity together. The war had been raging for 6 months, and the galaxy was burning. General Quan Minho stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship Unity, watching another star system die. The hegemony wasn't just destroying rebellious worlds anymore. They were unmaking entire regions of space, turning matter itself back into void. General, we're receiving casualty reports from the Kelhari front, announced his aide. 47 worlds lost in the last week. The hegemony is using some kind of reality weapon. It doesn't just destroy things, it makes them never have existed. Quan felt the weight of every death, As Supreme Commander of the Liberation Coalition, he carried the hopes of hundreds of species. But hope was becoming harder to maintain when your enemy could erase entire civilizations with a thought. "Any word from Scientist Zhang?" he asked. "She's still working on the Liberation virus," came the reply. "But she says even if she perfects it, someone has to manually deploy it at the Nexus core. It's a one-way trip." In her laboratory aboard a hidden research station, Zhang Hiewan stared at her latest test results. The Liberation virus was almost ready, a sophisticated program that could reverse the flow of the binding network and free every enslaved mind in the galaxy simultaneously. But the delivery method remained impossible. The Nexus core was protected by layers of reality-bending defenses. Even if a ship could somehow fight through the hegemony's infinite fleets, the core itself existed partially outside normal space-time. Getting inside would require someone who could navigate dimensions that human minds weren't designed to understand. Her contemplation was interrupted by an alert. "Scientist Zhang, we have visitors." She looked up to see the most unlikely group imaginable walking into her lab. Dr. Lim Jae-seok, the protocol's creator, was there with Captain Lee Dae-ho, the smuggler who had started it all. But they weren't alone. With them was Dr. Park Mi-young, Lee's former engineer, except she wasn't entirely human anymore. Park's exposure to the liberation technologies had changed her. Her body flickered between solid matter and pure energy, and her eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire universes. She had become something new. A being who existed partially in normal space and partially in the dimension where thoughts became reality. "Mi-young," Zhang whispered, barely recognizing her old colleague. "What happened to you?" "I volunteered for the deep integration tests," Park replied, her voice echoing strangely. "I wanted to understand how the binding protocols really work. To do that, I had to learn to exist in conceptual space, the realm where ideas have physical form." Dr. Lim stepped forward. "She can reach the core, Zhang. She's the only being we know of who can navigate the psychic barriers protecting it." "But she'll die," Zhang protested. Park smiled, and for a moment she looked like her old self. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll become something else entirely. The only way to find out is to try." As they discussed the mission, news arrived that changed everything. The Eternal Five had finally revealed themselves, emerging from the Nexus core to personally lead the war. They appeared in the space above Coalition worlds not as ships or armies, but as living gods, beings of such power that their presence bent reality around them. Threshkunnan alone destroyed 3 star systems simply by thinking about them. Another of the 5, Velmoth the Dreamer, turned an entire coalition fleet into crystallized time, trapping thousands of beings in a single moment forever. The third, Gorthak the Hungerer, began consuming the life force of entire worlds, adding their power to his own. "They're not even using technology anymore," reported General Kwan's intelligence chief. "They've become technology. Each of them has the power of entire civilizations backing them." But the coalition had learned something too. Working together, freed species could create wonders that none of them could achieve alone. Human intuition guided Vorthak construction, which channeled Nemael energy, which was calculated by Kelhari mathematics, which was enhanced by dozens of other species' unique abilities. They created ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that fired concepts instead of energy, and shields that protected against attacks that hadn't been thought of yet. The war became a battle between perfect order backed by stolen power and chaotic creativity fueled by genuine cooperation. The turning point came when the coalition discovered the truth about the Eternal Five. They weren't just enhanced beings, they were the consumed essences of their entire species. Each of the 5 had devoured their own people, turning every member of their race into raw power for themselves. "They're not gods," Dr. Lim realized, studying the data. "They're the ultimate expression of the binding protocols. Beings who took the concept of control so far that they consumed everything they were supposed to protect." This knowledge spread through the coalition like wildfire. The enemy they faced wasn't evil in any normal sense. The Eternal Five had become pure order, pure control, pure stagnation. They genuinely believed that consuming the galaxy was the only way to save it from chaos. "We're not fighting tyranny," Captain Song realized during a command meeting. We're fighting the death of possibility itself. The final phase of the war began when Engineer Yoon completed the Liberation virus. It was more than just a program now. It was a living idea, a concept that could spread through the binding network and transform it into something entirely different. Instead of stealing potential, she explained, it will share it. Every being in the galaxy will have access to the collective knowledge and abilities of every other being. True unity instead of forced uniformity. But deploying it required reaching the Nexus core, and that meant someone had to fight their way past the Eternal Five themselves. As the Coalition prepared for the most dangerous mission in galactic history, volunteers stepped forward from every species. "I'll go," said Captain Lee, now an old man but still determined to finish what he started. "We'll go," corrected dozens of voices as beings from across the galaxy insisted on joining the mission. Dr. Park, now existing mostly as conscious energy, studied the tactical plans. "The core exists in conceptual space as much as physical space. I can guide a small team there, but once we arrive, we'll be fighting on their terms, in a realm where thought and reality are the same thing." General Kwan looked at the volunteers, humans and aliens, soldiers and scientists, beings of matter and energy all united in purpose. "If we succeed, we free the galaxy. If we fail, interrupted Captain Song. "At least we fail as free beings. That's more than this galaxy has had for 50,000 years." As the strike team prepared to launch, something unexpected happened. Across the Coalition territories, every freed being, billions of individuals from hundreds of species, began focusing their thoughts on the same goal. Not coordinated by any technology or command, but simply united by the desire for universal freedom. The psychic pressure of so many minds thinking the same thought began to weaken the barriers around the Nexus core. For the first time in eons, the Eternal Five felt something they had forgotten: uncertainty. The battle for the galaxy's soul was about to begin, and nobody knew how it would end. But for the first time in 50,000 years, the outcome wasn't predetermined. Chaos had returned to the universe, and with it, hope. As the strike team's ship vanished into hyperspace, heading for the heart of enemy territory, one thought echoed through the minds of every free being in the galaxy. Today, either tyranny would die or freedom would. There would be no middle ground. The cascade had spread beyond anyone's wildest imagination. What started as a single broken relay had become a wave of liberation that swept across 1/3 of the galaxy. Hundreds of species were breaking free every day, and with their freedom came an explosion of knowledge and technology. Dr. Lim Jae-seok sat in his prison cell on the hegemony capital world, staring at reports of the chaos he had helped create 50,000 years ago. He had been the chief architect of the binding protocols, a brilliant scientist who thought he was creating peace. Now he was watching his life's work crumble, and he couldn't decide if he felt horror or relief. "Dr. Lim," said the guard, opening his cell door, "you have visitors." He was surprised to see Captain Song Yoon-ji, a human woman wearing the uniform of something called the Liberation Coalition. With her were beings he didn't recognize: a crystalline Vorthak whose body pulsed with inner light, a Nemael whose energy form barely maintained a solid shape, and a Kelhari whose watery flesh constantly shifted color. "Doctor," Song said, "we need to talk." They brought him to a secure room where holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy. The free zones were spreading, but so was the hegemony's response. Entire star systems had been destroyed rather than allowed to remain free. 12 billion souls on Keftar Prime, the Kelhari representative said, her voice like waves on a shore. Gone. The hegemony sent planet killers rather than let them stay free. 17 worlds in the Vorthak sector, added the crystal being. Reduced to dust. They're not trying to reconquer anymore. They're just destroying everything they can't control. Dr. Lim looked at the displays with growing horror. I never meant for this to happen. The protocols were supposed to prevent wars, not cause them. Song leaned forward. We know who you are, Doctor. We know you designed the binding systems. We also know you've been in prison for the last 3,000 years. Why? Lim was quiet for a long moment. I began to see what we had really created. The hegemony wasn't preventing wars. It was preventing life itself. So I tried to build safeguards into the system, ways to gradually free species when they were ready. The council considered this treason. Doctor, the Nemael being said, its voice like wind through crystal. We need to understand the true structure of the binding network. How do we break it completely? Lim brought up his own set of displays, showing the galaxy's hidden infrastructure. What you've broken so far are just the outer networks. The real control comes from here. He pointed to the galactic center, the Nexus core. It's a massive construct that processes the stolen potential of every bound species and feeds it to the Eternal Five. The Eternal Five? Song asked. The original founders of the hegemony. They haven't just been ruling the galaxy, they've been consuming it. Every innovation they prevented, every dream they crushed, every spark of creativity they suppressed gets processed by the Nexus and added to their own power. The hologram showed something that made them all step back in shock. The galactic center wasn't just home to the hegemony's capital, it had been turned into a vast machine. Stars had been moved into perfect patterns. Planets had been converted into processing nodes, and at the center of it all was a structure larger than solar systems. They're not just overlords, Dr. Lim continued. They're parasites. They've been feeding off the galaxy's life force for 50 millennia, growing stronger while everyone else grows weaker. Captain Song studied the data, her face grim. How do we destroy it? You can't, not with any weapon. The core is protected by the Eternal Five themselves, and they've transcended physical form. They exist as pure consciousness backed by the stolen potential of trillions of beings. But the Vorthak's crystal body suddenly brightened. Not destroy, transform, the network exists. We could reverse its flow instead of breaking it. Dr. Lim's eyes widened. You mean turn the system that steals potential into one that shares it? Theoretically possible, but you'd need someone to physically reach the core and reprogram it from the inside. A suicide mission, Song said flatly. Almost certainly. The core is at the center of the hegemony's strongest defenses. Even if you could fight your way there, the Eternal Five would never allow it to be reprogrammed. Their conversation was interrupted by alarms. Overlord Threshkanan, one of the ancient rulers, was addressing the galaxy. The being that appeared on screen was barely recognizable as once having been alive. Threshkanan was a writhing mass of energy and shadow with eyes like dying stars. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around its words. Children of the galaxy, it said, its voice reaching into every mind. You have forgotten your place. You have forgotten that chaos brings only suffering. We offered you peace, order, purpose. You chose rebellion. The image shifted to show fleet after fleet of hegemony warships, more than anyone had imagined possible. We withdraw our protection. We withdraw our guidance. We leave you to the darkness you have chosen. But first, we will show you the price of defiance. The transmission ended, but its meaning was clear. The hegemony was done trying to maintain control. They were preparing for total war. Reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. The hegemony wasn't just sending fleets. They were awakening ancient weapons, releasing stored energies, calling back technologies that had been sleeping for eons. It was clear they intended to destroy the free zones entirely before starting over with a blank slate. We need that liberation virus, Song said to her team. How long before Engineer Yoon has it ready? She says 3 months for a version that could work on the core, replied her communications officer. But the delivery system still requires someone to manually place it at the heart of the Nexus. Dr. Lim looked at the young captain with something like respect. You're really going to try it, aren't you? A handful of free species against an empire that's ruled for 50,000 years? Song smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like what she was. A young human who should have been intimidated by the scope of what they faced. Instead, she seemed energized by it. Doctor, my species spent most of its history being told what was impossible. We were told we couldn't fly, couldn't reach the stars, couldn't break free from our planet. Every time we proved them wrong, she gestured to her alien companions, and now we're not alone. We have friends who can sing matter into new shapes, who can become pure energy, who can calculate probability itself. Together we're going to do something that's never been done before. What's that? Lim asked. We're going to free an entire galaxy. As the Liberation Coalition began preparing for the greatest battle in galactic history, something else was happening. On worlds across the free zones, beings who had never met were working together on technologies that none of them could have imagined alone. Human creativity was combining with Vorthak precision, Nemail energy mastery, and Kelhari probabilistic thinking to create wonders. For the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy was creating instead of just consuming. New forms of faster-than-light travel, weapons that could punch through dimensions, shields that bent reality itself. The free species were innovating at a pace that terrified even the Eternal Five. But time was running out. The hegemony's final fleets were already moving, and when they arrived, they would bring an end to everything. The only question was whether the galaxy would die free or live enslaved. The revolution had become a war. Now it had to become something more, a transformation of what it meant to be alive in the universe. News traveled fast through the underground networks. Within weeks of Lee's discovery, whispers reached every corner of human space and beyond. The crystal's signal had awakened something in species across the galaxy, memories of what they used to be before the chains. Admiral Cho Hyun-sik stood in the war room deep beneath Earth's surface, studying reports that made no sense. 12 different alien species had attempted to contact Earth in the past month. None of them should have been able to break through hegemony communication blocks. "Admiral, we're receiving another transmission," announced Engineer Yoon So-ra, the youngest person ever to earn a position in Earth's military research division. "This one is from the Vortak Collective." On the main screen, crystalline beings appeared, their bodies made of living mineral that sparkled like diamonds. They had been classified as Tier 9, primitive Stone Age creatures who barely understood fire. But the being speaking to them was clearly using advanced technology. "Humans of Earth," the Vorthak said. Its voice like music played on crystal chimes. "We have awakened. The false sleep is broken. We remember who we were before the binding." Admiral Cho leaned forward. "Who were you before?" "We were the builders of the great ships that sail between stars. We grew entire planets from single seeds of crystal. We sang the songs that held galaxies together, until they made us forget." Similar messages came from others. The gaseous Nimael, who the hegemony claimed were barely intelligent clouds, revealed they had once been masters of energy manipulation. The aquatic Kelhari showed ruins of underwater cities that spanned entire ocean worlds. But the most shocking revelation came from Agent Nam Ji-hoon, a hegemony intelligence officer who had been secretly gathering information for months. "The hegemony knows," he reported during a hidden meeting with Lee and Kim. "They know humans are different. Your species' chaotic neural patterns make you naturally resistant to the binding protocols. That's why they've kept you so isolated." Lee felt a chill. "What do you mean, resistant?" "Human brains developed through millions of years of unpredictable evolution. You're naturally immune to most forms of psychic control. Other species evolved more logically, making them easier to bind. But humans, you're chaos-made flesh. The hegemony considers you a virus in their perfect system." Engineer Yoon had been studying the alien technology they'd recovered, trying to understand how the binding protocols worked. "I think I know why we're immune," she said, bringing up brain scans on her computer. "Look at this. Human neural patterns are incredibly complex and random, but other species show these regular, artificial patterns overlaid on their natural ones." The scans showed the horrifying truth. Every bound species had foreign neural networks grafted onto their brains, technological chains that limited their thoughts and abilities. They're not just controlling technology and resources, Yoon realized. They're controlling minds directly, making entire species forget what they're capable of. Agent Nam nodded grimly. "The binding protocols don't just limit advancement. They rewrite personalities, suppress creativity, eliminate the desire for freedom. Most bound species don't even realize they're slaves because they've been programmed to be happy with slavery." But their investigation had not gone unnoticed. 3 days later, hegemony battlecruisers appeared in Earth's solar system. The largest fleet humanity had ever seen surrounded their homeworld. "By order of the Hegemony Council," announced the fleet commander, "all research into forbidden technologies will cease immediately. Surrender the artifacts and personnel involved in these illegal activities." Admiral Cho knew they had no choice. Earth's defenses were no match for even one hegemony ship, let alone a fleet. But as he prepared to surrender, something unexpected happened. "Unknown ships detected," reported his sensor operator. "Sir, these aren't hegemony vessels." Ships appeared throughout the solar system. Crystalline Vorthak vessels that looked like flying gemstones. Nimael energy forms that were barely visible. Kelhari craft that seemed to be made of living water. Species that had been enemies for millennia were arriving together. "This is Crystal Singer Veltar of the Vorthak," came a transmission. "We stand with humanity. Energy Dancer. Zephyr of the Nimael joins this." Alliance, said another voice. Wave Rider Kefsal of the Kelhari offers our strength, added a third. For the first time in 50,000 years, the bound species were working together. The battle was brief but decisive. When the hegemony ships opened fire, they expected to face primitive human technology. Instead, they met weapons that combined human unpredictability with alien innovation. Vorthak crystal cannons channeled through Nemail energy fields and guided by Kelhari probability calculations created effects the hegemony had never seen. But victory came with a terrible cost. The hegemony fleet's destruction triggered something in their systems. A pulse of energy spread outward from the battle site, and suddenly every binding relay in the sector overloaded and exploded. My God, whispered Engineer Yoon, watching the energy cascade on her screens. We didn't just break the local controls. We broke everything. Across dozens of star systems, species that had been bound for millennia suddenly remembered who they were. The effect was like watching time-lapse photography of flowers blooming. Civilizations that had been stuck in primitive states for thousands of years suddenly began advancing at incredible speed. But the freedom came with chaos. Some species, overwhelmed by the sudden return of their full capabilities, descended into madness. Others turned on each other in rage over their long enslavement. A few tried to recreate their own versions of the hegemony, wanting to control others as they had been controlled. We've started something we might not be able to control, Admiral Cho said. Watching reports flood in from across the galaxy, Lee, who had joined them on Earth after the battle, studied the tactical displays. Maybe that's the point. The hegemony controlled everything for 50,000 years, and look what that got us. Maybe chaos is better than perfect order. Agent Nam brought disturbing news from his contacts inside hegemony territory. They're preparing something called the Final Protocol. If they can't maintain control through the binding networks, they have other options. What kind of options? Kim asked. Planet killers, Nam said quietly. They'd rather destroy rebellious worlds than let them stay free. As reports continued to pour in of newly awakened species achieving incredible breakthroughs, Earth faced a terrible choice. They could try to hide, to protect their own world while others burned, or they could stand up to the most powerful force in galactic history. Engineer Yoon was working frantically on something she called the Liberation Virus, a technology that could break binding protocols remotely. But early tests showed it needed to be deployed from inside hegemony space to work. Someone would have to carry it right into the heart of their empire, she explained. It would be a suicide mission. As the hegemony prepared to show the galaxy the cost of rebellion, and Earth prepared to make the hardest decision in human history, something else was awakening. Deep in the galactic core, ancient intelligences that had slept for eons began to stir. The bonds that held the galaxy were breaking. But what would rise from the ashes was anyone's guess. The revolution had begun, but the real war was still to come. Captain Lee Dae-ho stared at the dead ship floating in space. His smuggling vessel Freedom's Edge had been running supplies to the outer colonies when they found it. The ancient craft was massive, larger than anything he had ever seen. Strange symbols covered its hull, and it gave off no energy readings at all. Captain, this ship is old, said his engineer, Park Mi-young. She was young but brilliant, always curious about things she should not touch. Really old. Maybe older than the hegemony itself. Lee knew they should report the find and move on. The hegemony of perfect order controlled everything in the galaxy. They decided which species could advance and which must stay primitive. Humans were labeled as Tier 7, barely above animals in their eyes. Earth was locked in its own solar system, forbidden to expand. But something about this dead ship called to him. Take us closer, Lee ordered. His crew looked nervous. They all knew the rules. Finding ancient technology was supposed to be reported immediately. The hegemony would come, take the ship, and probably arrest anyone who had seen it. But Lee had spent too many years watching his people treated like slaves. As they approached, their sensors picked up a faint signal from inside the derelict. Park's eyes went wide as she read the data. Captain, there's something alive in there. Not really alive, but active, like a computer that's been sleeping. They docked with the alien ship carefully. The airlocks were different from anything they knew, but somehow Park figured out how to open them. Inside the ship was dark and cold. Emergency lights flickered on as they walked through corridors that seemed built for beings much taller than humans. In the center of the ship, they found it. A crystal the size of a person, glowing softly with blue light. As soon as Lee touched it, images flooded his mind. He saw the galaxy as it used to be. Thousands of different species, all free to grow and learn and explore. He saw amazing cities floating in space, planets turned into gardens, beings of pure energy dancing among the stars. It was beautiful beyond words. Then he saw the change. 5 ancient species coming together, deciding they knew best how the galaxy should work. They built machines to control other races' minds. They put limits on how smart species could become. They called it the binding protocols, for the good of galactic order. But Lee saw the truth. The elder species were stealing. Every time they stopped another race from growing, they took that potential for themselves. They had been feeding off the galaxy for 50,000 years, growing stronger while everyone else grew weaker. The vision ended, leaving Lee shaking. Park was staring at readings on her scanner, her face pale. "Captain, this crystal, it's recording everything. Every species that was bound, every technology that was stolen, every dream that was crushed. It's all here." Before Lee could respond, alarms started blaring on their ship. 3 hegemony patrol vessels had appeared, their weapons already charging. "Unknown vessel, you are in violation of archaeological protection laws," came a cold voice over the radio. "Surrender the artifact immediately." Lee recognized the voice. Commander Kim Tae-woo, a human who worked for the hegemony. Like many humans, Kim had joined their forces hoping to earn better treatment for Earth. But Lee had heard rumors that Kim was beginning to question his loyalty. "Commander Kim, this is Captain Lee Dae-ho. We found something here you need to see. Captain Lee, you are ordered to surrender the artifact. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Park was frantically copying data from the crystal to their ship's computers. "Almost done," she whispered. Lee made a decision that would change everything. Instead of surrendering, he activated his ship's engines and ran. The chase lasted 3 days. Lee knew every smuggler's route in this sector, every hidden asteroid field and sensor shadow. But Kim was good at his job, and the hegemony ships were faster. Finally cornered in an empty system near the galactic rim, Lee decided to take a risk. He opened a direct channel to Kim's ship. "Commander, I'm sending you something. Look at it before you arrest me." Lee transmitted part of what they had found, just enough to show Kim the truth about what the hegemony really was. For long minutes there was silence. When Kim's voice came back, it was different, quieter. "Captain Lee, my sensors show 4 more hegemony ships approaching. They will be here in 10 minutes. Lee's heart sank. He had hoped Kim might understand, but it seemed the commander was just buying time for reinforcements. "Captain," Kim continued, "I suggest you take your ship to the coordinates I'm sending you. There's an old mining station there. No one uses it anymore." Lee looked at the coordinates in confusion. Why was Kim helping him escape? "Commander, I don't understand." "Captain, I've spent 5 years enforcing hegemony law. I told myself it was for the good of humanity. But what you've shown me..." Kim's voice trailed off. "I need to see the rest of that data. All of it." As the hegemony reinforcements arrived, they found Kim's ship alone, reporting that the smugglers had escaped using an unknown type of drive system. The commander filed his report, and then quietly changed course toward the old mining station. At the abandoned station, Lee and Kim sat across from each other while Park displayed everything the crystal contained. They watched 50,000 years of galactic history, seeing how a free and diverse galaxy had been slowly chained into submission. "My God," Kim whispered, "we're not just restricted, we're being farmed." The crystal showed them something else too. Humans were different. The binding protocols that worked on other species didn't work as well on human minds. Humanity's chaotic evolution, their tendency toward unpredictable thinking, made them resistant to the mental controls. That's why the hegemony kept humans so restricted. They weren't just another primitive species. They were dangerous. They were immune. "What do we do now?" Kim asked. Lee looked at the crystal, still glowing with the stolen dreams of 1,000 worlds. "We wake up the galaxy." As they began planning their next move, none of them noticed the small signal being transmitted from the crystal. Across the galaxy, other ancient artifacts were beginning to stir. Hidden caches of forbidden knowledge were activating. And on distant worlds, beings who had forgotten they were slaves began to remember what freedom felt like. The first chain had been broken, but breaking all of them would require something the galaxy hadn't seen in 50,000 years. A revolution.